Hello and welcome to the 33 Ways Not to Screw Up podcast. So, this is the book series podcast to help you steer clear of business pitfalls. I'm your host, Alastair McDermott, and today I'm here with a fellow author in the series, Craig Wilson. Craig is a globally recognized expert in the recruitment of great talent, and his company has vetted over 100,000 candidates and over 1,000 clients, seeing firsthand what works and what doesn't work. So we're going to have a chat to him about his book, 33 Ways Not to Screw Up Hiring Great Talent. So Craig, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show, Alastair.
Good, and thanks for coming on. We're recording this live. We're gonna it's gonna be live and unedited. We're giving people that authentic experience. So and this is our opportunity not to screw up the podcast. So we're gonna talk a bit about your book. So I loved asking authors how their book came about originally, because there's always great backstories in that. So can you tell us a little bit about how your book actually how that came to be the concept that you've written?
Well, I've been in the recruiting business for 23 years, and I've always been a people person. I've been involved in hiring of people probably since the 70s, and I've seen what works and learned a lot of times what didn't work. And it's always been something in the back of my head that I wanted to do. And when Melissa came along with this 33 Ways Not to Screw Up series, it was a ground floor opportunity. I didn't want to write a long book. I just wanted to write a really good instructional. And frankly, her idea is a terrific one because it gets you the opportunity to kind of claim, if you will, without coining any expressions, the Chicken Soup for the Soul series for business, if you will. And it's a very unique space because it's not a dummy series. This is a series for professionals, two professionals in each category. And it wasn't being covered, this particular topic. So I grabbed it quickly.
Yeah, and it's something that's really it's really fraught right now, hiring, and it's in the media all the time. That people are businesses are having trouble with the labor market, and that there's a lot of people on the move. There's the whole work from home thing. It's a very kind of volatile place to be. Is that your experience with it?
Yes, indeed. The pandemic was a real game changer and the biggest disruption we've had in decades, if not longer. And the pandemic gave people a lot of cause to reflect on their current careers, what they wanted to do, and they had actually government aid to sometimes refocus on what they wanted to do, which is an issue. So the labor market, as I was saying, is way more whacked long-term than the supply chain for materials and finished goods, because that's just a matter of tweaking production schedules. But people's lives literally changed. To your point, the working completely remote, working hybrid, and then working in the office. And today, by the way, only 20% of offices are full-time in the office. 5% are permanently remote, and the rest, 75%, are a combination of hybrid. And that gets very interesting. I think it'll, just like any earthquake, it'll settle down and it will get to a more steady state. But it's changed a lot of people's lives, and a lot of people left industries to go to others. In my particular industry of recruiting, because everyone specializes in something, there were 1.8 million people in America that left food service. Said, I'm not going to work in restaurants. I'm not going to work in the supply channel to the restaurants. I'm going to do something completely different. And it, because obviously the restaurants weren't open. And so a lot of them have drifted back, but it was a major earthquake, as I said.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point about, the supply chain bottleneck is just that. It's a bottleneck that will eventually resolve itself. But in the labor market, you're talking about something that is a permanent change in the way that people view themselves and their career. So I hadn't thought about that before. That's really interesting, because it does imply that this is something that businesses and people are going to need to deal with and figure out, because this problem is not going away in that same way that they can eventually get their supply chain stuff sorted out. But this is a kind of a more permanent problem. The other thing you mentioned is the offices and remote work, and Now, I've always worked in the tech industry. So even in my first job in 2001, I was working remotely. I was in Dublin, my manager was in Kansas, and my coworkers were in Menlo Park in California.
Yeah.
So I had coworkers in Austin, Texas. So the remote work thing is not new to me. And then since I've been running my business, so I've effectively been remote working for over 20 years. What has really surprised me with that is how people are just not getting it. Like, you have to allow remote working if you want to be able to get the best people. And it kind of, I'm a little bit astonished that a lot of people hiring are not really getting that. So can you tell me a little bit about that? Is that something that you think about? Is that something you've written about in the book?
Well, some of it's economically driven and some of it's culturally driven. So, for example, if you're Tim Cook and you just finished a $1 billion Apple corporate office, are you going to want to see it empty for a long period of time? It's an investment. And it's also a cultural builder, because the innovation thing happens much more around water coolers than people want to acknowledge. It's just great ideas sometimes happen per chance. And when it's always a structured Zoom or Teams meeting, it's not necessarily as collaborative, and it's held on time, so there's that issue going, both the fact that the office exists and the fact that they would like to have people come. But then again, like I said earlier about the human supply chain, a lot of people just have found that they can work for other industries and be remote. So if you're trying to get the best of talent, and nobody wants to live in the most expensive markets like Redwood City, and they've moved to someplace like Idaho, how are you going to get talent and attract them and keep them? And the bottom line is that is absolutely a way to screw up hiring good talent at this point, by saying, no, you will be in my office. It's not one of my 33 ways points. I guess that'd be 33 and a third, it'd be like the record album. But the bottom line is you have to play with what the game rules are, and the rules have changed.
Yeah, and the rules have changed, and I think that's what's really interesting in this space, is that it's so volatile. Everything is changing for you. So okay, tell me a little bit about what you're addressing in the book, and can you tell me, like, where are the major screw ups happening? What do you think people are doing wrong the most?
Well, let me start by just saying an organization is nothing without its people. It's just brick and mortar. And so recruiting talent is an art form, and retaining it should be an obsession. So being flexible to the changing needs of people is everything in recruitment. And I would say, if I was as a first takeaway, if there's a roadmap to all this, the first part of it is transparency and having a mission. And a lot of companies that are really well-known brands do, and that helps them greatly recruit. If you're Nike and runners want to work for you, I mean, it's very easy to get talent. If you're not Nike and you're somebody in that athletic domain, now Under Armour and all that, I mean, they're all developing brands partially to sell product, but also to attract talent. And so, the first rule of the game, if you will, of the 33 ways is, if you ask 5 of your employees what your organization's mission is, and you get 5 different answers, you don't have a mission, and you're going to hire accordingly. So, hiring is all about building a culture and building a very strong ethic toward a common purpose. Therefore, you have to have a common purpose. That would be like rule number 1.
Yeah, that's a very kind of high level strategic point that I think that people might gloss over, particularly because, a lot of people, when they think about business, mission statements and purpose statements and things like that, they think, oh, that's just a kind of a tick the box exercise, that isn't something that's really important. But yeah, it makes sense that that if you're trying to bring in good people, you have to stand for something.
Yes, and if you have a team mission, then anybody you hire is a part of that mission. Therefore, obviously, their deliverables have to be associated with common goals, and therefore the job description, to a certain extent, has some of those facets in it. Otherwise, it's like the Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know what you need, you're going to get it. You'll get whatever you want, right? But it doesn't necessarily make sense. So, building a great team, that's really stage 1. But then, one of the examples I used in the book was great. And it was a subtle ad. You're in tech, you might remember it. But I remember one time Google wanted to hire really strong line coding people that were credible for their AI. And they didn't want to run an ad because there's all these people that want to work for Google. So what they did is they put a complex formula on billboards in LA and in San Francisco. And it was sort of like the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The geeks saw it and got it and immediately responded to them with the answer. And those are the people they wanted to hire. Well, it was very clever. I never forgot that. And this was 20 years ago, but I mean, they just built it so that the right people came. And sometimes that's how you attract talent. It's an interesting
I remember
play.
that, and I remember that being shared in the kind of the software community. And like that was something, that people,
it was brilliant.
Yeah,
it really was.
It was kind of like, test yourself against this algorithm or this problem. Can you figure it out? So yeah, absolutely. And I've seen that same thing done for web designers in the source code of websites. So in the behind the scenes code, so you might go to the Microsoft homepage or something, or the Google homepage, and a web designer might look at the source code behind the scenes, and there's a hidden message back there. It says, hey, if you're checking out the source code, you're obviously interested in coding. Give us a call if you're interested in working for us, and we'd be interested to talk to you. And these kind of hidden messages in place like that people don't know about, because you don't normally look at that. Most people would never look at the source code for it. So
and to that point, there's a huge difference between a job description and a job ad and the real job. For example, the descriptions have to have all the legalese. You must be able to carry a 50-pound case. You must be able to travel, whatever, right? Well, that pretty much gets about 99% of the world's population, right? So those aren't the real attributes, and yet they're all equally weighted. And the reality is, and one of the things I do, which would be the next portion of getting talent, would be that everyone that on a hiring team needs to be on the same page as what the strategy is. Because again, the candidate's not stupid. I've had, and you want to talk about 30 ways to screw up, I had a terrific candidate in one particular situation, and he interviewed with the president, he interviewed with the VP of sales, and the role was for a national account role. And he went to the controller and he said, well, what do you think about expanding into this market? And the guy said, I don't think it's worth it, damn. Well, if you're a candidate and you see dissension and this guy's controlling the purse strings, well, they didn't get him, obviously. So they weren't on the same page, and they went out to try to find somebody, and it blew up. You have to have a hiring team that's on the same page. And by the way, it works both ways, but my coaching for any candidate to interview is I tell them very simply, you need to find out what the needs are of each person you interview, because think about it. It's a role that interfaces with them. And they have different needs of that role. The financial person versus the marketing versus the sales versus the operating, they're going to look at the role differently based on how they interface with that role. And this is really people. This is speed dating, right? And you have to find out what the needs are of that person so that you can make them assuage their fears and make them comfortable that you've got what they need in spades, right? To the same extent, that's what hiring people need to do. They need to go to candidates and say, look, this is where we're trying to go. This is what we need to do. What can you do to help us get there? And all the hoopla about playing games, and if you had a choice between this or that and would you jump from a ship? No, I mean, it's all kind of stuff that doesn't really come into play once the person's on board. So when you do it in the interview, it's kind of like word games that don't work. At the end of the day, it's lining up needs and wants, and then what can be delivered. And that's always worked best. You can attest with references whether the person actually could do that. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people play games in their hiring. And the second part that I think is a major screw up in terms of getting great talent. You asked for a few stories. So one of them, we had a wonderful company, but the HR person knew that the candidates need to have certain programming language, and it was Creole at the time, which is an engineering CAD design kind of program. And rather than talk to anybody, they would put the person in a conference room, sit them down with a stopwatch, and give them a piece of paper, say, take this test. And then if you do well, we're going to talk to you. So basically, we were putting good candidates in there, and 4 or 5 of them said, I don't want to work there. Well, of course. Why would you do that, right? And it wasn't even known by the president that this was happening, but it was a filter that they needed, which, you know, had to be subtly done in another way than what they were doing. You know, especially in a tight market, you need to open your doors, bring them into your home, if you will, and put the rush on the candidate in a big way too.
Mm. Yeah, that kind of game, particularly in I mean, it depends on the market that you're in, but if you're in a market where the candidates have a lot of options, like particularly in like the tech field, I have been in that situation before where I was asked to bring some code in, and then the person who I showed it to in the interview said, "Oh, that's no use to me. You could have got somebody else to write that code for you." And so the first thing is they did ask for it. And then the second thing was, even if I didn't write it myself, all they would have to do was ask me to explain it. And either I would be able to explain it or I wouldn't. And if I hadn't written it myself, but I could explain it, then that's good enough, you know?
And the crazy thing is about testing. I mean, I'm not in that space, and no offense, Tim Cook, maybe you're not listening, but you know, if you were interviewing for another job at a CEO and somebody said, take this test, the stuff that he might have known 20 years ago, he's not using now. He's leading teams. And a lot of people that were given that test would have had to brush up on it. So it was even a high school senior who were good at taking tests, a course in freshman year and say, okay, now work this formula. They're going to go, well, I haven't done it in 3 years, right? It's the same in work. A lot of people might have done that program or worked with it in a prior role, but they're not up to speed on it now. In fact, that almost holds people back from hiring better talent, bottom line. And the market is so tight, I can't tell you, it's virtually no unemployment. And as a recruiter, I can tell you this year, my team, and we have 60 in our system. So there's 8 of mine that specialize in food service. We have seen more candidate turndowns and client counteroffers in this year than 10 years combined up to this point. 10. So you have a lot of candidates going, well, I really appreciate that, but I'm going to go with this other company. And then you have candidates that are hired, and the companies are mounting counteroffers, which typically aren't supposed to work because of different reasons. Usually there's a motivating underlying, but no, they're throwing so much at that we can't afford to lose you now. And so it's an incredibly tough time to hire good talent, and you've got to be on your A game.
So the other thing that I wonder about, and I don't know if it's related to that, or maybe it's a different point, is how do people hire people who clearly in hindsight were a totally bad fit? But how do people like screw it up that much that they hire somebody that was just not suitable for the role? And like, how do they get through the whole process of multiple people interviewing them, and you know, all of the background checks, everything, and somehow they hire people who aren't right?
That's a good question. And I will kind of question back to you what you define as a good fit. And let me explain, because a lot of companies want to hire square pegs for square holes and round pegs for round holes. And that doesn't necessarily mean a bad fit. That you know, Jimmy Johnson once said, and when he was coaching the Dallas Cowboys, they said, why do you always draft the fastest runners available? He said, because I can't coach speed. And the moral of the story is, if you get somebody that's extremely good in one area, sometimes a fluid organization will find a role and create something and put them in that role. It's not a bad hire. It's only a bad hire if you take a good person and put them in the wrong role. But to your point, if someone is pulling the wool over everyone's eyes, it's gonna come pretty quickly. And the best examples of that would be companies with a very developed culture. And what I mean by that is, I call it the tipping point for cultural tipping point is about 75 to 80%. That means if you have a team of people that are fervently, passionately about the mission, And somebody comes in the system that had sung the right song and talked the talk, walked the walk, but they're now all of a sudden exposing who they really are. It's going to get drummed out and rise right to the top because, and I can give you examples of sports again. For example, when Dennis Rodman left the Detroit Pistons and he joins the Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan and company, Scottie Pippen, very well-oiled machine, Phil Jackson, and Rodman was going to be Rodman. And he started clowning around on the court. And it didn't take anything at all from Phil Jackson because everyone said, that's not who we are. You can be who you want off court, do your, antics. And it's the same in a company. If you have a really good cultural tipping point, what happens is the employees say, nah, that's not who we are. And to the point where that person won't be there very long or they're going to change.
Yeah, I guess I love the sports analogies. Yeah, it's something that I've seen where, I think that point you're talking about, the culture and the purpose, I think it's crucial that part is in alignment, because like you say, the skills, you can always get the skills, you can teach the skills, you can learn the skills. But if you don't have that alignment around, the way that they think and the things that they care about, they're not going to be a fit. So,
and to your point about that, the other great example of if it's talent, if it's not talent, then it may have to part ways. But if there's a talented individual, thinking out of the box works so much better than not. For example, there's a good one of Apple again. Originally, at one point, they had 2,000 people in IT because they had to set up their systems and corporates and you name it. And this is 20 years ago, but if you know the story, that the gentleman that was over IT asked, I think Jobs at the time, he said, why do we have all these people in IT? Well, we need to, he said, no, we're Apple. We don't need that many people. This is intuitive. We should make the product intuitive. I think they whittled it down to a department of 5, 10, 15 people. But what did they do with the other 2,000? And what they did was they repurposed them, and they became the very first Genius Bar people. When you called in for the Apple helpline and the Genius line and whatnot, those were guys that were originally IT, and they turned them outward to customer facing so they could, help them through call-ins rather than, just getting rid of them. And sometimes repurposing talent is the best thing a company can do, done right.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Repurposing is something I think a lot about in terms of content, because it's really important in the kind of the marketing world, reusing what you've already got, and that sounds like a really great idea. So because if somebody isn't a right fit for what they're doing, they might be a right fit for something else, and you're keeping them in the company. You're keeping all of the knowledge that they've, all of the kind of institutional knowledge that they have. So that sounds like a really good idea.
I've had conversations with people that were repurposed, and I've had conversations with people where the organization tried very hard to repurpose them and it didn't work, but they ended up separating amicably, which is also good for the brand, because they said, look, they were really good to me. We just couldn't make it work out. That when a candidate says that to me, we just couldn't make it. He's no longer with that company. But he's saying we couldn't make it work out because they're going in this direction and I didn't bring, then you know what? That's still a win-win, because he's getting great references. He's going to get a new job and the boss is going to be right there. The former boss, I should say. Done right, it's a great strategy.
Yeah. Can you tell me then, because I want to move on to another topic I think is really interesting for a lot of people, is interviews. Can you tell me what your thoughts are on interviews? Because I think it's something that people do screw up a lot. And that's where they can lose those great candidates.
Well, I'm going to talk about interviews from two contexts. One, how to, and second of all, how important it is to make the great hire. So, and I don't care what role it is, by the way. So, as I said earlier, an organization is nothing more than brick and mortar. But you're going to spend, as a company, any organization, nonprofit, profit, you're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on any hire over time, and millions in a very high level role. And so an organization's overall goal should be to make the very best possible hire at that given point in time. And so a lot of companies tend to just say, well, who do you know? We got to fill a role. That's about as bad as it can get. The second worst would be just to run an ad and see what drifts in. And the third would be to maybe have an in-house recruiter who probably does mostly hourly people in the factory, try to find some significant managerial role. And even companies that have very strong internal recruiting departments in public companies, if they don't work with outside firms, in some cases, retained firms such as the big 4 or 5, which would be Heidrick and Korn Ferry and Spencer Stewart, et cetera, Aiken Zender, then I mean, I'll give you 2 good examples. When IBM, this is an older example, but when IBM was really hurting because they had been too tied to making boxes, right? And all of a sudden that was not the model. And they literally retained 2 firms, I think it was Spencer Stewart and Heidrick. And they said, we're going to give you full pay for whoever gets the candidate. And they said, well, why? They said, because one of you is known for having half the Fortune 500 market, the other is known for having the other. And we want to find the very best candidate. They found Lou Gerstner, and he turned IBM around, and I think their valuation went through the roof. And yeah, the fee might have been close to $1 million to each firm, but what was the opportunity lost if they got the wrong candidate? And so to that point, interviewing is teeing up the very best candidates possible for big critical hires, and even in mid-level hires, having a very good selection of candidates and not just hiring somebody. And so that boils even rolling further back, companies that have good development programs for talent and companies that have a bench strength are not knee-jerk hiring where, oh my God, we lost somebody, it's a 911. Well, then they're going to hire the first 2 people they can interview, and that doesn't necessarily make them better. It makes them compromised.
That
so
sounds like a really
it's
bad
a
idea.
whole strategy of bench strength. It's a whole strategy of, so now that you're interviewing though, it's a team sport, and you have to, again, have a bunch of people look at that individual from different levels. And that's more what this book actually has to do with. It has to do with hiring a person, not an image. It has to do with, interviews are a 2-way street with the transparency. I can tell you how interviews can shortcut. If you use an assessment tool as a screening device, that's a mistake. It's great to help you acclimate somebody into the firm, but if you look at their personality profile and say they don't fit, no, it's a bad idea. Unprepared interviewers are going to scare off talent. Bad company tours are just that. A lot, and you see the factory is selling your company, right? If you have banners all over and mission statements, it's one thing. If it's just a dirty back of the plant, it's another. It sends a message. A lack of passion. Interviewers that are still busy looking at their screens and typing away other things while a candidate's trying to impress them, not a good idea.
I saw that one myself.
Yep.
When
there's so many ways.
My boss was sent to do an interview, and he was, he had no interest in doing that interview. I have to go up and interview somebody. I'll be back to get some work done. Because the interview wasn't real work.
Yeah, it really made an impression on you. You still remember it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that was 25 years ago. So
there you go.
Yeah, so the tours thing as well, like I always remember somebody telling me, like, it's basically the inverse Dilbert rule, which was the more Dilbert cartoon cutouts you see on the cubicles, the worse the place is to work, because every one of those Dilbert cartoons that is cut out and stuck up by somebody is a real thing that's happened.
Oh, no doubt. That's why it's humorous, because there's a hint of truth in every humor.
Yeah.
And social media, to that point, is a microscope today. Oh, my goodness. Glass ceiling, Yelp, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok. People's comments on social media are trusted advisors in many cases, and it'll scare off top talent in a heartbeat. And there's no way to cut it off. It's an inevitability of today's society. So the company that lives transparently in a good way is going to benefit, and the company that hides its true self or actually really, is out of touch with things or doesn't have a unified company team, it's going to show up on social media without a question.
Yeah, and I've seen that the glass ceiling. I think everybody should go check out their own business on glass ceiling and just see what's up there, and if you're able to have that conversation with people, talk to them, because it's like I have seen people using that in not in the hiring sense, but in deciding whether to work with a client or not. Because you can see how the business owner treats their staff.
And Yelp
that
reviews
can be critical.
are important for retail establishments. If you're thinking of working in a restaurant or working at a retail store and the Yelp reviews are just horrible, what does that tell you, right? So it's everything's public and there's no hiding it, unless maybe you're in the government, but that's a different interview.
That's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, isn't it though?
Okay, so just to recap some things you're talking about here. The critical importance of having a clear mission that 5 separate employees can all agree is the same. That they can kind of reword that in their own words, but there is a clear mission, because that will attract good candidates. You were talking about the way that interviews are done as two-way conversations. You talk about them being done as a team being conducted by a team rather than an individual. Can you just expand on that one a little bit?
Well, again, I think in a way it's speed dating. Like I said, if this individual is actually going to be interfacing with different people in the company, and their roles are going to hinge differently, how much benefit do you get from having 4 or 5 people going, Alastair, I think if you were on board, this is what we'd be doing together. And I really need this. And my problem for 2023 is, and blah, blah, blah. And what do you think about that? What can you do to help me? And you as a candidate goes, well, listen, when I was in this other company, I did this exact thing. And this is what we did. And this was, now you've almost got the person on board in the sense that each person is telling that candidate what they need and how they can help that candidate grow. Because the other part of the two-way coin is, millennials not even close to the iGen. iGen's on steroids in terms of wanting to be mentored, wanting to be welcomed, received, rewarded, want to improve their resumes and all those things. So the people on a team basis can just say, listen, this is what I can contribute to you. So as opposed to just a one-way kind of wall between the company and the candidate, it's real people interfacing. So when the candidate starts, they're already feeling they're on board, for starters, because they've already been very transparent in their needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's it's really interesting that there are such generational differences there.
Huge.
But I think that the overall message I'm getting from everything that you're saying tied together is communication and transparency, and that whether you like it or not, you've got to have that transparency, because it's there. People can access this information. They will find out. People will share information. Information wants to be free.
And to the last points, I guess, is on the 33 ways. If you consider that you've just started looking for talent, then you've gone a lot of investment of time, you've gone a lot of investment in interviews, you've done background checks, which are smart to do. Reference checks are very important, not so much to validate if the candidate worked there or something, but a reference check can give you a great idea of, if you're concerned about anything about a candidate, you can talk to that reference and say, well, how did you manage that? Or how did you, let me tell you, it's way different than just a printed reference, and people need to do that. It takes time, but the point is you're investing more and more and more time and resources to get to the finale, the final offer, if you will. And at the finale, you've got a lot riding on it, right? And so each step in the 33 ways gets more and more important to do right. And my last little frustration is sometimes as a recruiter, because I see this all day long, and then you got everybody on board, and then some sort of recruiter CRM or in-house HR CRM kicks out the offer, and it looks like a freaking legal contract that's 5 pages long, and the candidate will involve. No, I mean, you've gone this far. Why would you do that? It's not cheap to find great talent. It's more expensive to find the right candidate and blow the deal with a poor offer process. So the way it ought to be working, yeah, the offer could be something to be signed. And yes, there may be that's up for grabs, by the way, with the Congress, but there may be a non-compete. They may rule those out because of right to work. But there's all kinds of things that can be in the offer. But the bottom line is, you know what? I was a CEO for a German company. I had a 38-page contract, but at the end of the day, you put the contract in the drawer and you go to work, right? And it boils down to who is your boss. 70% of employees leave companies because they can't get along with their boss, not because of the company. So the boss, the hiring manager, needs to present the offer. And I don't care about legalese where they say, well, yeah, but what if you didn't do it right? Well, then you're not trusting your manager, or you're not trusting your own people. The bottom line is you need to propose. Would you like to join our company? And I never want to present offers to candidates, especially when there's nuances involved in either short-term or long-term incentives, how the person would make commissions or how they would make their bonus, because that's going to come from the boss. And no one can deliver it better. And that's the relationship that sets right there at that point, sets it moving forward for better or for worse, right? Because if the employee gets a good offer from a boss and accepts, they're already on their way toward working together versus, well, I really enjoy you and I'll see you sometime. And then this alien thing comes from legal department that's a mile long. No. Verbal offers are very important. That's at the end. That's the big deal. But anyway,
you're literally
think
building the
bottom line
relationship
done right
at the start.
You can get great talent out there.
Yeah, you're literally building the relationship at the start there,
from the very beginning.
Yeah, I've seen
did
this.
Did you know that? And Southwest Airlines is in a little bit of hot water right now, but that was from a technical disadvantage in the system they had. But I can tell you that when they interview candidates, did you know that from the minute someone flies from any airport to their corporate offices in Dallas, that candidate's being watched? And each person along that passageway, from the check-in to the flight attendant to the receptionist in the company, is evaluating that person. So it works both ways, by the way. It should, so that when that person gets there, the company knows of the person's quality and they've already kind of got a feel for that person. And then they put the big rush on, of course, if it's somebody they want. But the real important thing is when you get somebody good, you want to, it's a holistic thing, I guess is what I'm saying, that a company is not just an organization, but it's a set of people, and people need people. And so that's the way you need to interview, and that's the way you need to hire.
Okay, so I think that's a good place to wrap. I just want to ask you, what's your favorite either screw up or your favorite tip from the book? Is there one there that you like to?
My favorite tip from the book is an experience that I had with Vern Laux, who was the president of Baxter Travenol Laboratories, and I was 27 years old. And I was assigned to him as the Crusade of Mercy assistant because I just gotten my MBA from Northwestern. And I loved it, and I never forgot it. And I tell anybody this, candidates, mid-level managers and CEOs. And the story was, we'd been to a power breakfast where the president CEO actually of Sears, Montgomery Ward's, Western Electric, all these companies were at this board table at a Borg Warner corporate office looking over Grant Park. And I was blown away. I'm 27 years old. Vern was like a god. I mean, he Yale undergrad, played He's a quarterback on the football team, went to Harvard Business, and here he is, president of this big company. And he was actually doing the deal to buy American Hospital Supply. So here I am. I'm about 6'1". He's 6'4". Looks like Robert Wagner. And I'm like, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. And we're in this limo going back to his corporate office. And he said to me, he said, what'd you just see back there? And I said, well, it's pretty impressive. He says, do you know the Peter Principle? I said, yeah. And if you don't know it, it's, everyone rises to his or her level of incompetence at some point in their career. And he said, well, you know the corollary? And I went, corollary? No, I don't. He goes, well, if someone rises to his or her level of incompetence and it goes unchecked, there's nothing to keep he or she from going right to the top. And you just saw it this morning. Never forget it. So, and if you think about it, where is Sears today? Where is Montgomery Ward's? Where is Western Electric, right? And so, you know what? Somebody's only as good as what they've done and what they continue to do. And everybody has a realistic shot of making a dent in this world. And again, I'm a big people person, but I never forgot that, because from that point on, I could deal with anybody at any level just as a person and say, you know what, we all put our pants on the same way. And it's always been with me. So I've never had a problem in dealing with any client. I don't care what size they are or what level, and I think that's the way we need to be. Everyone has a job to do and everyone needs to do it well to make the, system work. But that's probably the biggest, thing that changed my life when I started dealing with people, is I just look at them as people and say, well, what can we do together? So.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, I want to wrap up because I know we're running out of time. Who is the ideal reader for this book? Who is it aimed at?
The ideal reader for 33 Ways Not to Screw Up Hiring Great Talent would be owners of companies, hiring managers, and agents of change in HR departments, because they are terrific when they're good. And I've actually sent it to some of my favorite, people changers. One actual HR director I worked with had the title Chief Employee Experience Officer. I thought that was brilliant. And so some people in that area of human relations and diversity, inclusion, and all that are unbelievably solid. And so the people that should read the book are people that can make changes in their organization at a high level, and frankly, anybody that's going to be interviewing for talent in any organization of any size.
Yeah, well, I think it's been great to chat to you about this. It's something I think about. I am an employer. I have one employee, but it is something I think about. And when I talk to my employee, Aiko, and I think about this, and I can only imagine what that's like when it's scaled up to large businesses. And it's an area I think is fraught with peril, hiring, and because it's costly. To make those mistakes in time and opportunity as well as money. So I think it's really important. So I'm glad that you've written the book.
To your point with your company too, I can tell you that the biggest companies, and the company I used to be with, Middleby, is $5 billion today. And they're a terrific organization today because there's a real subtlety here. And hear what I'm saying. They're not structurally driven. They are culturally driven. Mm-hmm. It's okay in that company for any group president in one area to reach out to a junior engineer on another, silo. They're not silos, that's the point. But he can, in another group, and say, we have a customer that has this need, we need to solve it. What are we going to do? You could spend all day restructuring and trying to address different problems in company, in clients, and in changing markets and conditions. But the reality is you're never going to ever have a structure that's current with the changing demands of the world. But if you have a culturally driven company where any two people, high and low, get together and say, we got to solve this problem now because this is what the customer needs, you're going to knock down walls. And that is where it's at in today's world. So I would say that is really important. And then the only way to be culturally driven really is what this book addresses, is that the people have to be on the same page and understand the rules of the game and act accordingly.
Yeah, really, really interesting. So, Craig, where can people find you if they want to learn more? We're going to link to the book in the show notes for the podcast episode, but is there a particular social media that you're on more than others?
Yes, actually, I do have a website. So it's craigswilson.com.
Cool. We'll link to that in the show notes as well.
And if you go to it, it'll have the cover and all that on hiring talent 33 ways. I actually have a talent assessment that you can take. The assessment will give you determine how good your hiring skills are based upon the beliefs, strategies, and behaviors of those are hiring great talent currently. And so it's a great kind of litmus test to see where you're at in the process. And then, of course, the book is available through Melissa's 33 Ways series website, as well as, of course, on Amazon. And just go to 33 Ways Not to Screw Up Hiring Great Talent, or the 33 Ways series, and you're going to see a bunch of them. But the book is available in print, in ebook, and also in the audibles. So it's all set to go.
The audiobook done already. That's great.
Yeah. Well, so awesome. I really appreciate your time, Alastair. It was great.
Yeah, it's been fun to chat. I think that it's a really, really important topic, and so it's been great to chat to you about this. So to the listener or to the viewer on YouTube, thank you for watching or listening. You can find this episode, more episodes, and everything at 33wayseries.com. And Craig's book is linked on there as well. So you'll find all the links in the show notes. So thank you for your time and attention and sticking with us. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks again. Bye now.